Mirrorless cameras are well on their way to replacing DSLRs, and in this video, I'm going to explain why.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Hi and welcome back to DIY Film with Merle Becker, the channel where I help you make better videos. Y'all know that at the end of the video I've got a bonus filmmaking tip, so be sure to stick around. Okay, so you've heard the term mirrorless camera, and you kinda sorta understand what they are, but not really. Or maybe you're about to buy a mirrorless interchangeable lens camera, or you're weighing it against a used DSLR, but you're not really sure which way to go. Well, I'm going to start off by saying that mirrorless is the way to go. It's the direction that camera manufacturers are moving or have moved in. And I'm going to explain why this is, and also why I like them. First though, in order to understand why they're starting to dominate the market, we need to talk about how both types of cameras work. Let's start with DSLR cameras. DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. In a DSLR camera, light enters through the lens and bounces off a little mirror. Then it bounces off a little pentaprism up top that reflects the image to the viewfinder. As you can see here, the lens is not in line with the viewfinder, so the mirror makes it so that you can see what you're shooting up here in the viewfinder. Then, when you take a picture or video with a DSLR camera, that little mirror flips up. And another little shutter behind it opens up, allowing light to hit the sensor in the body of the camera. In fact, if you're looking through the viewfinder while you take your picture on a DSLR camera, you'll notice that it goes black while that little mirror is up. Also, you'll hear a little click. Fast forward to mirrorless, interchangeable lens cameras, which, as you probably guessed, don't have that little mirror. Instead, the light passes through the lens directly to the sensor, which in turn transmits the digital information to the electronic viewfinder or LCD screens. And don't get me wrong, I loved my DSLRs for many years, but mirrorless cameras are better. And here are my top 4 reasons why I think mirrorless cameras are an improvement over DSLRs. Number 1, mirrorless cameras are smaller, thinner, and lighter. No DIY videographer wants to carry around any extra weight, ever. So when the smaller mirrorless cameras started coming out, photographers and videographers were happy to shed a few pounds from their kit. The reason it's smaller, as you might guess, is that DSLR cameras need a little more room for that flipping mirror, and the mirrorless cameras don't. Not only that, but in a mirrorless camera, some of the lenses are smaller and lighter too. With mirrorless cameras, there's less space between the back of your lens and your sensor. And wide-angle DSLR lenses, because of the distance between the back of the lens and the sensor, typically have to incorporate larger and heavier glass elements to shift the focal point back towards the sensor. But in mirrorless, with less space between the back of the lens and the sensor, it allows lenses like wide-angle ones to have a little less glass in there. And they end up being smaller and lighter. Double bonus. Number 2, mirrorless cameras have better autofocus. Back in the day, the way that DSLRs autofocused was by one of 2 methods: contrast detect autofocus or phase detect autofocus. Phase detect is a little quicker than contrast detect. And because of the way DSLR cameras are designed, when you're shooting video, it has to rely solely on the contrast detect autofocus. And in contrast detect autofocus, the camera analyzes pixels on the sensor using calculations based on contrast. In doing so, it moves the focus back and forth on the subject to find the point of highest contrast. However, it takes a little while for the camera to determine what has the highest contrast. This is why in DSLR video, you'll often see things moving in and out of focus as the camera works to find the highest contrast part of the image. DSLR video shooters will tell you that it was often painful to try to use contrast detection autofocus while shooting a moving subject because you had to wait for the camera to get correct focus. And that sometimes meant you would miss the shot. Now, mirrorless cameras also used contrast detect autofocus until around 2010, at which time they switched to a hybrid autofocus which also uses the quicker phase detect autofocus. But then companies like Canon took it a step further and developed dual pixel autofocus, which uses each pixel as a phase detect sensor. And now the autofocus in their mirrorless cameras is even snappier because they incorporate what is called eye detection autofocus. With eye detection autofocus, your camera finds your subject's eyes and it uses that part of the image to help keep the face in focus. This is great for vloggers and YouTubers who are looking into the lens all the time and they want to have the camera automatically stay in focus on their face. So yeah, the autofocus is better with mirrorless, and videographers love it. Number 3, in-body image stabilization. Image stabilization is a feature that has been around in camera lenses since around 1994. Nikon started making lenses with image stabilization and they subsequently charged a little bit more for their IS lenses. So what exactly does image stabilization do? Basically, if your camera is moving around a little bit, image stabilization in the lens will move the lens elements to compensate. And that removes some of the shake in your footage. But now, in many mirrorless cameras, image stabilization is built right into the camera body itself. The downside to this is that it drains the battery a little bit more. And I should mention that shorter battery life is maybe one of the biggest downsides to mirrorless cameras. But with the added benefit of in-body stabilization, your shots have less shake and blur. And I'm here for it. Number 4, mirrorless cameras are quieter for stills. If you're a still photographer, there are inevitably situations where you want your camera to not make noise. Perhaps you're shooting wildlife, or maybe you want to remain like a fly on the wall at an event. And because they don't have that little mirror flipping up and down, mirrorless cameras don't make a loud noise when you press the shutter. So it may seem like a small thing, but photographers know what I mean when I say a quiet camera will sometimes get you a better shot. And hence, that's why I consider quieter to be my last reason. So there you go, my 4 reasons I like mirrorless cameras better than DSLRs. They're smaller, thinner, and lighter. They have better autofocus, they often have in-body image stabilization, and they're quieter. Okay, let's do the tip. So for those of you who have moved or are moving from a DSLR to mirrorless camera, you should know that now you need to be a little more diligent about protecting your sensor. The reason why is now you obviously don't have a little mirror between you and your delicate camera sensor. And when you remove your lens, that sensor is totally exposed. So for this reason, you need to take extra care when changing your lenses to prevent dust or dirt from getting on that sensor. That means when you take off that lens, put the new one on right away so that nothing gets on the sensor. Or put that little cap on your camera body. Or if worse comes to worse and you don't have the cap, turn the camera upside down if you need to set it down for a minute. And of course, if you have to change your lens in a dusty, rainy, or snowy environment, do it under your jacket or better yet in your car. Because if your sensor gets crud on it, everything will be messed up. So just remember, without that mirror, sensor protection is all on you, baby. Alright friends, I think that gives you enough to reflect on. And as always, if you found any of this helpful, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe and hit the bell so you know when the next one is posted, and I will catch you next time.